You're the
Yeah.
good man.
Yeah, Frank said he wouldn't miss any meetings. Do you think I believe that?
You just missed 3 minutes.
Stop down here and get some work done yesterday. There are quite a few city employees down here working. I'm going to give it about another 30 seconds. Rick, are you ready?
Take it away.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Monday morning workshop, and we will begin with the city manager's response to council questions.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Moore, council members. We're going to start with a response to questions that came up at some of your prior workshops. There were just 3 or 4. I'll cover these fairly quickly. The first one was in response to the presentation on the capital improvement budget, and it had to do with asking for a list of what was proposed to be eliminated from a category called miscellaneous. And in the letter, we outlined what the eliminations were, what the reductions, and as you can see, they were spread over 5 years of the CIP. The first year, FY13, $45,000 was reduced from the tree replacement fund. And just to head off a question on that, that's a reduction that occurs because the number of projects that we're doing, the resulting funds that are contributed to this account is estimated to be less. So it's really not an intentional reduction of that fund. It's just simply a byproduct of the capital projects that would have tree replacement associated with them. By the way, there is anticipated to be about a $70,000 add to that account from a major project during the course of the year. The other adjustments in the miscellaneous category were in the IT department. You'll see those numbers listed for each of the other years.
I guess what's changed in the IT department, they were originally put in, but now they're being taken out. So is it as a result of action? We're taking on that new system? Right?
No, it's not that. Alan, you want to try to?
Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. The largest reduction is in the first year. You'll see a fairly large number. That's just related to significant carryover balance as we were doing programming for what the capital needs are in the IT department. So because of the carryover capital funds from the prior year to the current year, there is a less of a need for issuing additional funding for the next year.
Thanks, Alan. The next question, are the streetscape projects listed anywhere in the CIP, and can this information be made available prior to the printing of the budget book? I've listed here the allocations for streetscape projects by year in the capital program, and they are listed in the capital improvement program in the document, which, by the way, we have in front of you. The document has been printed. It's available. I think you have one at each of your places. But that document does reflect these streetscape numbers as well. The next question, has there been any additional review or research on the proposed bus rapid transit? I think that's what the question was in regards to. And then the question was, really for us, is where does the local match come from? I think the local match is, Christine and Bob, is around $5 million. That's a $20 million project. But my suggestion, although it's not written here exactly, but my suggestion is that the city work with DART, the business community, Polk County, private individuals to figure out some way to cover the match amount here. It's $5 million is more than we have, certainly more than we can do as a city, but it does seem like a project that may lend itself to generating dollars from some other sources, so hopefully that effort can be ongoing in a way to close that gap.
Question on that, Rick. I know that there's some sensitivity to time And I thought that we were going to have DART come back and do another proposal just to focus on that. Do we have that scheduled?
They have the presentation prepared, and I'm looking at Alan. Well, we can get that scheduled within the next couple, 3 workshops. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Anything more on that, Chris?
Well, I know that we talked about having identified specific projects that are in our CIP that would be eligible match, and
yes.
That'll be part of that. Is that correct?
Well, I think the presentation that they would do would explain to you in more detail what the proposed bus rapid transit project is and where it goes and the rationale before it and what's included in it. The method for funding the local match, I think, will come out of discussions between the parties that I just mentioned. And yes, we are looking at other investments that we're making along Ingersoll, sewer investments and such, that might be included as match for this improvement. So yeah, that'll all be part of it.
Okay.
Okay, the last question had to do with the notion of green infrastructure as it relates to our combined sewer overflow projects. That's the CSO, combined sewer overflow, is the other term that's sometimes used is the consent decree that we've talked about, where we have to make something like $250 million worth of investments in our sewer systems to comply with federal Clean Water Acts. That's been obviously one of the major pieces of work that we have to undertake, and it certainly drives a lot of the expenditures within the sewer enterprise accounts. The question had to do with looking at a couple cities, Indianapolis and Philadelphia among them, in terms of the extent to which they've used green infrastructure to address those particular needs. I'm not really the expert on this. There's fairly good explanations in the letter here. In the city of Indianapolis, they did go through and apparently were able to amend their agreement with EPA, but as we understand what they did there wasn't a whole lot of green infrastructure that was part of that. It was just a revision of what they were proposing to do with some deep tunneling that apparently did reduce their costs but didn't necessarily involve a lot of green infrastructure. The city of Philadelphia, or the Philadelphia Water Department, does have some green infrastructure provisions, but however that looks to be accomplished primarily in the context of new development, where they've utilized some green infrastructure techniques, some of which I think we're beginning to do here in Des Moines as well. So Philadelphia has done some. Whether or not those particular techniques apply to our situation is a matter of some debate, I think. But there are some options in Philadelphia that I think are educational, worthwhile for us to look at. But those are the 2 cities we looked at, and if you have more questions, I'm sure Bill or Jeb or others would be happy to try to expand that response. Other than that, Council members, that's the response to questions.
Are there any questions? I think we'll move on then to Class C liquor licensing. Jeff, are you going to handle that?
Yes, I will. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. Jeff Lester, City Attorney, here to give you a very brief liquor code review and proposed amendment. We began our review as directed by council with several preconceptions and assumptions, some of which may not be entirely accurate. A recognition that liquor administration is staff intensive and council intensive in terms of time and energies. We had council's prior indication that the administration of the liquor code was disproportionately concentrated on just a few liquor licensees as opposed to an even distribution of time and effort, and an acknowledgement that the city's power is significantly limited by state statute. We also had some additional assumptions that repetitive issues and establishments that had repeated problems came from licensees without felony convictions, but with recent misdemeanor or alcohol convictions. And finally, that financially strapped licensees oftentimes are willing to take more chances and then create more problems in administration than those that are financially stable. We also conducted some additional review, limited review with our Iowa Cities listserv to compare licensing between Des Moines City Code and that of other major Iowa cities that are on the listserv. At council direction, we also compared the letter from Mr. Mike Brandel to the current code and practices of the city of Des Moines.
Jeff, did you find many differences between our code, our ordinance, and other cities within the state?
There are not a lot of differences in terms of implementation. One of the reasons is because, as we've indicated, and as council is well aware,
you don't have a lot of flexibility.
The state has really preempted the field on much of the liquor regulation that the cities can do. And there are a couple differences I'll get to and explain why we haven't gone that way, and then our proposed amendment actually does look at what some of the other cities have done. Our proposed amendment, has really focused on good moral character, as that term is defined in the state and city code, both state statute and administrative code. We analyzed the definition for opportunities to look at and improve the way that council can review applicant or licensee information in their record. This proposed amendment, we believe, will allow council to take a better stock of the applicant's financial capability, any misdemeanor records that they have, and alcohol-related offenses that they've committed. So, for example, council can look closely at recent misdemeanor convictions as one element of deciding to grant or not grant a license. The applicant's recent alcohol-related offenses, that's also one element that can be reviewed by the council.
One of our problems is the spouse. If one of them's in trouble, the other one takes out the liquor license, and we got the same situation.
Well, and let me just add to that. You know the liquor license that we dealt with on the Ingersoll Dinner Theater? Mm-hmm. That I questioned her? Tried to, I knew there was an issue, but I couldn't get to it. Her check bounced. Her check bounced.
Yeah.
And I mean, they've had one event there, and it's clearly a front. You know, the Facebooks, if you look at the Facebook pages, they admit on the Facebook pages that, you know, they're going after it for this one person that can't get the license on his own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't know how we can protect against that.
Well, that's actually a really good comment, Bob, and that's one of the real difficulties in any type of licensing is we have to be able to empirically establish that the spouse or that the other person is up front. And with respect to any current situations, I know that there are some under investigation, so I'm not going to comment on any specifics. But that's a great observation. It's a problem that we have to deal with regularly, unfortunately. One of the things that we looked at in terms of what other cities do and that we considered and then ultimately eliminated as options for the city of Des Moines included adding to the causes of suspension or revocation. That we didn't feel would work primarily because it's preempted, we think, legislatively. One of the differences is that some of the cities or a couple cities have much larger distance or separation requirements between alcohol establishments and schools or other alcohol establishments. But those cities also, as we understand it, don't use a conditional use process. So in fact, we think the city of Des Moines actually has more control over those licenses than just a random geographical difference would have.
Jeff, with the Class E liquor license issue that we have going on right now, we have no ability to include in the ordinance geographical?
No, that is something that we could include and actually do include currently. Okay.
But I mean, if saying that we can't have more, they have to be a quarter mile apart, or
that's potentially something we could look at. Obviously, there's a place where the rubber band stretches so far that it breaks. Mm-hmm. The reason we haven't done that primarily is because that it greatly enhances the value of the liquor licenses, because it does nothing to the existing liquor licenses, but new liquor licenses would have difficulty coming in, so the value is increased. And again, we already use the conditional use process, so that actually gives the council more control, because then you can set specific conditions as opposed to just relying on a geographic distance.
Okay.
Turning to the actual amendment, to what we're proposing, The underlined is the new section. The current section is what's not underlined, so we've actually added quite a bit of definitional language, and that's to improve what council can look at. We've clarified that financial standing is adequate, and looking at adequate financial standing, it's things like do they pay their bills on time, and do they have verified sources of financial support and operating capital, do they pay all their expenses, assessments, taxes, fees, administrative penalties.
So would that also include having the ability to require a credit report and making sure that...
Cannot require a credit report.
You cannot require it. Okay.
But that's not one of the things that's permitted, but we can ask for what their sources of financial support and their operating capital are. So that's admissible or permissible.
And so when you say you can ask for sources, does that mean you can request copies of bank statements that would indicate what balances are, and if they have a letter of commitment from a financial institution, you can get a copy of that?
Certainly, some of those details are things that we can and will add, and I think some of them actually are included in our application process currently, but not necessarily on anything in code that grants us the authority to do that. A good reputation is defined as including factors of sale of alcoholic beverages to 19 and 20-year-olds, patterns and practices of alcohol violations, recency of convictions for alcohol-related offenses, or the recency of misdemeanor convictions. And we think that this will enhance council's ability to look closely at how people do business and what their behavior has been in the past.
So what would be the timeline then? Say, for example, it's in the last 5 years, are we looking at?
5 years is generally for felonies, so we were thinking more like probably half that time for misdemeanor convictions.
Okay.
Could we change that in there, 19, 20-year-olds to persons that are underage?
Well, that actually, persons underage would include the other violations of laws. I mean, we can make it more broad if you like. We've made it specific because 19 and 20-year-olds seem to have a penchant for getting the fake IDs and getting into an establishment. So, but we could make it that way if you'd rather.
I'd just hate to have them figure out. I'd hate to have them end up using this as a loophole or something if they had 18-year-olds.
They won't be able to.
Okay.
Also, per council direction, we reviewed Mr. Brandel's letter, as I indicated. We appreciated very much his comments and suggestions. You have a confidential from me detailing those point by point. I won't go through those now. Just to say, for purposes of our meeting this morning, that the ideas that were really good ideas we're either already utilizing or they're asking us to control state and county officials elected and appointed that we have no control over and are not going to have control over, or there are other ideas that would simply require legislative approval that we can't do on our own.
Will you be sending a response to Mr. Brandel?
I certainly can.
I think it'd be good if you just send him a copy of this PowerPoint as well.
Sure, be happy to do that. If you have any other questions or comments, those are good observations, and we'll get those.
I like this. I guess I'd always like to see it go further, but I understand
Sure.
Our hands are tied. And what would be the timeline for this to come back?
We can have it in ordinance form and ready to come back at the next council meeting in February.
Okay.
Thanyou.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, we'll move on. Budget update.
Scott Sanders is going to handle this. But one thing is he's getting set up there. I mentioned earlier we've got the capital budget document to you, and as he goes through this, we'll talk about the schedule to come back and talk about this and answer questions that you have. Typically in the past what we've done is once you've gotten this, you've taken a week or two to review it. And then we sit down at a meeting like this and go through it and answer any questions that you've got about any item in it. We'll have the operating budget to you, I think, about the end of next week, maybe?
First couple days in February, hopefully.
Okay. So we're down to the level in the budget process where you've got the documents starting with capital today and then operating in a couple weeks or so. So, Scott.
Great. Good morning, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. The first two enterprise funds we're going to address today are the solid waste and the stormwater utility. going to start out with the solid waste enterprise. You're probably well aware of what the solid waste enterprise does, but just wanted to give you a reminder. It's trash collection, yard waste, recyclable collection as well, and we serve over 64,000 homes. The fund also supports the scrub activities, the property cleanups, and the clean team. Those are kind of the extra services that are provided to citizens in Des Moines. Municipal collections provided to the parks as well, our own city government buildings, and the airport, as well as the WRA. We're looking at about 50 full-time positions within this utility. I wanted to give you a view of where the expenditures are in this budget. This is reflective of the 2013 budget with a little over $11.5 million in expenditures. As in most of our operations, a good portion of the cost are associated with our employees. As a service industry, that should be expected. You have some other unique fees with this utility, with the landfill fees, and some of the equipment costs that are included in that $2.2 million, obviously. But there is some additional capital as well, that $821,000 figure. And then you have an other category. The other category, in case you're curious, is things like the utilities that we need to pay through operations, waterworks billing, collection activities, work comp, and then some indirect allocations of the administrative costs, such as my own Department of Finance and HR, as we support the solid waste as well. The two-year budget, as we'll program, shows you here the 2013 and 14. This utility is strong. It's got a healthy fund balance, and you'll see the revenues do exceed the expenditures by a tune of over $700,000 for 2013. There is a purpose for that. There is some extensive equipment to purchase with replacing trucks that is anticipated in the next 2 to 3 years, and the idea is to try and do that with as much cash as possible, such that we don't have to borrow. We can't tell you at this point if we'll make it. There might have to be some leasing arrangements made, but the intent is to build up that cash to take care of that equipment need here in the next 2 to 3 years. And you'll see that continues in fiscal year 14.
When we're not looking at equipment purchases, what would the balance typically be?
That's a good question. If we have an idea of what the total equipment, we might have to get that back.
That's fine. You know, if we could just get that.
We'll
back.
get you that figure on what
Okay.
the equipment costs and when we plan to make those essentially
Okay.
truck replacements.
Are you
Any
looking
other
at replacements also in 2014, or is 2014 a typical operating year?
14 is more typical, and you'll start, I believe, start to see those replacements in 15, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then as a summary for the solid waste, again, a very healthy utility for us. No rate changes necessary for 13 and 14. So we'll stick to that budget plan that you just saw. And the revenue remains stable. Obviously, people want their trash picked up, so we don't see a whole lot of fluctuations in the resident count or the amount of the trash. So that pretty much wraps up the solid waste, a pretty simple utility for us to manage. Is there any questions on solid waste before I move on?
Scott, where on that pie chart would workman's comp fall?
Work comp, I believe, is the other category. It's part of that $1.7 million you see in the lighter blue.
Is it still dropping the payouts, Bill?
Mayor Pro Tem Moore, members of the council, Bill Stowe, Public Works. The easy answer, Skip, not necessarily the right answer, is yes. The reason it isn't necessarily the right answer is, you know from your experience, there are these lag cases that are out there for several years and then settled several years after they've occurred. We still have a few of those. But automation, as you know, and as the council's aware, has significantly reduced the extent and frequency of injuries. So the 2 or 3 cases that we have that we work very closely with Mr. Wells and our HR staff to manage through often don't bubble up until several years after they've occurred. We still have a few of those in it, but roughly, and James can yell another number if it's inaccurate, we're still looking at probably of that other category $300,000 or $400,000 that are workers' comp related, but that's down significantly from just before automation, where we, as you may recall, had 18 or 19 people off out of a group that's now 50 because of injuries. So automation has had a huge, just exponential response on injuries and efficiency. Instead of having 2 people crews, we have 1-person crews. But the other side of it, as Mrs. Hensley's question goes to, is we replace those people with capital that's very expensive, and you run into pieces of that cycle like 2014 FY, where we run into the portion of the life cycle where we're replacing equipment as opposed to shoulders. But the meat of your question, Skip, really goes to reductions in costs from automation in workers' comp. Yes, we continue to experience those, but we still have a few future anomalies as they pop up, and people who are going through therapy and not recovering through regular practice are going to have shoulder surgery and then permanent payouts associated with that.
Have we automated everything that we do out there? Do we still have any functions that are not automated yet?
Great question. No, we haven't automated everything. As an example, each of you probably use the brown paper bags. Those are very manual in how they're picked up. We've tried to deal with some interim issues, like using a special kind of can that has our collectors pulling it into an automated can, but it's at best semi-automated. One of the issues that we face there is compelling people to have a third container, not only the blue one for recycling and the brown one for trash, but then now a third one that would be used for automated leaf and yard debris collection. We're kind of struggling with that, but we're not fully automated, Skip, and where we're seeing injuries now, frankly, are more likely in something like the yard debris bag collection than they are certainly in either recycling or in standard trash. So that's our next conundrum to try and solve. We're working on it, but really are at a bit of an issue. There are certain areas of town where we have smaller homes, as an example in Mr. Mahaffey's ward and the ward you live in, Skip, where folks just don't have the footprint in terms of a garage to be able to deal with 3 of these behemoth 96-gallon containers.
But to increase the use of those, is it possible we could reduce the cost on those automated, so it reduce our additional insurance costs?
There's no question, Bob, that in the long term we think it'll drive costs down. Unfortunately, we have a short term to deal with, and that's to finance essentially a $60 cart to be able to put in everybody's hands to do that. We have a voluntary automated program now where for a monthly fee, instead of buying brown bags, you get the third container. That's worked very well, but for some folks, the economics of that are not as attractive as it is for others of us who have larger yards and more trees. So we're trying to work on making that economics work. As many of you may remember, when we automated, particularly on the recycling end, that was a struggle and the economics were very challenging. In the short term and the long term, they've certainly paid off, as Skip's question goes to, but that short term issue is one we're a little concerned about how to get our hands around, and we continue to think through some ideas and talk with some folks who have done it.
My situation, where I'm right in the park, I may have a little yard, but I have plenty of leaves that come from the park.
We always have lots of donors from our neighbors in the leaf business, that's for sure.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, if it's all right, I'll move on to the stormwater utility. Again, we give a brief explanation of what functions the stormwater takes care of, and it's important to remember that street cleaning is part of this utility, as well as the planning and engineering that's associated with the capital costs for stormwater. There's also a lot of activity with the separation of the sanitary and storm that's included within this utility. The system includes approximately 472 miles now of storm sewers and over 24 miles of certified levees and flood walls. There's 32 pump stations, and we have staffing of about 25 that are dedicated to the stormwater activities. And then there are activities that are shared with the sanitary and WRA staff as well. So as far as the numbers look for stormwater, this will indicate, again, that employees is the largest portion of the cost to the utility, although a little smaller at the 32% level. And then you'll notice the debt payments is the second largest. And again, that's associated with the requirements that we have on our capital needs for stormwater and have had for a few years now. There's also some revenue to the CIP, that $1.2 million, which is cash projects that we try and avoid issuing debt for every capital project, so there's still some cash included in there. And then some contracts as well as other, similar to the solid waste. The other category includes the billing costs that Waterworks takes care of for us, and collections, and again, work comp and some of the other administrative costs such as finance, HR, and legal. Any questions on the pie chart? So what does the budget actually look like for 13 and 14? You'll see there's a small surplus in 2013, about $200,000, and then in 14 we build it up a little bit more for a similar reason, in that we'd still like to be able to use cash for capital projects where possible. But also 2014 is an indication that we're expecting more and more debt payments to come online. There are 2 bond issues planned within this time frame, one here in just a couple months to get some projects completed, and then a larger one in 2014 as well. Those 2 bond issues will address the $19 million capital cost of the levee improvements that the city is, that we've had previous discussions about, trying to get in front of those levee concerns. So there are other capital projects as well, and again, because of that, we'll be incurring more and more debt service payments as we go forward. And that is really not even the end of the capital issues. There's more to come about every 2 years is what we're looking at. 2016 we'll have a substantial borrowing expected as well.
So you're saying that of the 2 bond projects coming forward, the first one is on the levies, $19 million for levies?
The $19 million levies is split between the 2012 bond issue and the 2014. Okay. The expectation is it'll take more than just 2 years to get that going.
And what's the other project?
Actually, several projects. It's a list, and you'll see that on the last slide here.
Okay.
We'll have a chance to look at that. But there are literally dozens of other stormwater, as well as the separation costs, which are just ongoing, separating the sanitary from storm. We're sharing those costs about 50-50 between stormwater and sanitary moving forward.
Okay.
So in summary, what are we looking at for rate increases? It's important to first remember that for January 1 of 2013, there has already been implemented or approved a rate increase of 4%. And so the analysis we're looking at is essentially funding the 2012 bond series in 2014, as well as operations over the next 3 and hopefully 4 years. And so we are proposing then a 6% increase on January 1 of 14, 15, and 16. So there'll be 3 6% annual increases. The rate without those would have been $9.19. That includes the 4% that's scheduled for next January. So that's a $9.19 per household, per ERU, per month. And with those 3 6% increases, the monthly rate would go to $10.95 per household.
And so what does that mean per household, as well as on a commercial entity such as Dolls?
Yeah, so for most residences, 1 ERU, and that is $1.76 per month increase once it's fully implemented, all 3 6%. $1.76 a month per household.
$1.76 is the total amount per household.
For stormwater.
So as far as the rates for residential or commercial, the same rates apply?
The same ERU base rate, and then commercial properties have multiple ERUs depending on their parking lots, their covered surface area. And so I don't know if anybody has a good idea of how many ERUs a typical commercial.
Oh, it's all over the place.
It should be all over the place, from a small restaurant, probably one ERU to several.
To a large dairy.
Yeah.
With a lot of parking lots and rooftops.
Right.
Yeah. I think we've got some time, so.
So we're filling it in with me? Thanks, Scott. Bill Stowe, Public Works. Two things to note on that issue on commercial versus residential ERU payments, Bob. Residentials are capped at 1.5 ERUs. Industrials are not, or commercials are not. Therefore,
Whatever.
you and I may have large houses with large driveways and large patios, but we'll pay no more than 1.5 ERUs. But AE or the state fair or whatever other choice you want to make out there will pay really based upon the square footage divided by the multiplier, which I think is 1,230 square feet, if you will, something in that range. So you'll pay, if you are a dairy as an example, I don't have A's number, but it'll be it's the multiple of 40 or 50, as opposed to you and I will pay no more than 1.5 ERUs. But the portion of it that's industrial, commercial versus residential, my recollection is it's about 80% or so. Dan, you may have a specific memory. 80% or so is residential. The other remaining piece is industrial or commercial. So the lion's share is certainly on the residential side.
80%. Surprising it's so large. Yeah.
And if I'm wrong on that, I'm confident we'll amend that one.
Okay, so for the fiscal year 13, the capital budget is about $13.6 million. So we're getting not quite half of the $19 million is included in that. There's a lot of other projects you'll see on the next slide. The average budget thereafter is about $8.4 million annually on the capital side. We do have some cleanup, if you will, from paperwork standpoint on the 2008 and 2010 flood events still, with payments from the state and federal
What's
government.
the dollar amount on that?
I don't have an exact dollar amount, but we're still talking in the millions for the 2010, and actually the 2018 is probably still over $1 million as well, isn't it? So we need to get you those figures to show you what.
And why is it taking so long? I know it's
I'm going to have to let my staff, because obviously this predates me.
Good morning. Kurt Ruckel, Finance.
Morning.
2008, we're still waiting for the state reimbursement. All those projects need to be closed out. 2010, we're just getting underway with actually constructing those projects. And so until we submit all the costs, we don't know what the final reimbursement will be. But our model assumes that we will get reimbursement.
The 2010 includes property.
Also includes property
So
acquisition.
that's where some of the time is
Okay.
taken.
Okay.
So then lastly, I mentioned the rate increase, about $1.76. I had this last bullet point to indicate that $1.02 of that is capital related and debt service due to the capital. So if you wanted to break down the rate increases, 3.5% a year for the 3 years is associated with capital, leaving about 2.5% a year for operations. So a very reasonable rate of growth on the operational expense. However, the capital continues to strain this budget and will continue even beyond this time frame as where opportunities arise. Clearly, we're moving capital projects further and further into the future if they're of choice. But a lot of this is consensus. This is stuff that we have to get done, consent decree type stuff. So the stormwater will continue to be stressed.
As we look at budget constraints for the city and that, do we also look at these other associated WRA and places like that? This is additional cost to the taxpayer too. So
Absolutely.
if there are ways to cut costs there, that would be beneficial.
It's all part of the analysis. We absolutely spend a lot of time on that. And in fact, I'll let you know now, I guess it's appropriate that we're struggling with the sanitary as well. in the combination of the WRA and our own sanitary. And we want to spend a few more days, actually next week, working on sanitary because it's even in a more stressed, if you will, finances than the stormwater is.
Good.
So yes, we absolutely spend a lot of time looking at these enterprise funds, and Public Works does a fabulous job providing us what those projections and projects need to be as we move forward. In this, you'll see, this is more of a handout for you if you want to look over this. It's the capital projects. The large $19 million project is about six down in that middle section, starting with the citywide stormwater. You'll see it labeled as Des Moines River flood mitigation, $19 million, and it's spread out actually over 4 years, with a very small portion getting started yet this year and planning. Obviously, there's some design work that still needs to be done in the current year, but a lot of that will get done in 13 and then finished up in 14, 15. But there is just a mix of several projects that add up to a lot of capital.
Where are the watershed studies? I'm assuming 4 Mile. Are there multiple studies there that we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm not. We've got everything from lead.
You're getting your exercise this morning, Bill.
Should have kept the sense.
I need it. Bill Stowe, Public Works. Mrs. Hensley, the 4 Mile study that Mr. Moore and Mr. Mahaffey have been very interested in is still in process with Snyder Associates or the consulting engineers. The county is the lead. We would expect to see a report on that, at least in part, later on this year. There are a number of other watershed studies that are ongoing. Easter Lake is an example. We have a number of impaired waterways in the city of Des Moines. That is, waterways that the state of Iowa has determined are under particular stress. So waterway studies are really an ongoing part of our business in terms of water quality. We also, obviously, in this utility in particular, have ongoing concerns about water quantity and flood mitigation. So there's almost at any time 3 or 4 different issues going on. Certainly the 4 Mile is the one that's going to be most obvious to all of you, but we have a number of them going on in addition to that, including Yater Creek, Easter Lake. I can't think of any in your ward, Mrs. Hensley, obviously, other than the Raccoon is an impaired waterway, so one that we're participating in a number of studies involving water quality.
Yater Creek's in one too.
Yeah, that is.
I'm sorry, and Yater Creek also in your ward. Sorry.
Most of the problems come from your ward.
Huh?
We'll take note of that. The last item there, of that middle group, watershed studies, you'll see there's $230,000 for the current year, and then $100,000 or a little bit more than that in the future years. So once those watershed studies are done, then they're identified, given a name and a budget amount, and then they fall up above, like you see in Crawford Creek. So I knew it was up there somewhere. I was trying to find that.
Can I ask you a quick question? Just refresh our memories here. When you issue these CIP projects, we're going to be selling bonds for them, and generally they're of what duration?
The bonds, because of the magnitude of the size, will have to be 20-year bonds. They're not fully funded through bonds. We're, again, still trying to fund a little bit out of cash, just where the opportunity arises, especially for smaller duration or length of benefit type projects. So if it's more of a repair-oriented project, we want to try and use cash where we can, as opposed to longer life projects, we'll use the bonds. The 20 years is what will be needed on the bond side. I'll take this moment, if I could, to indicate we'll come back to you with a debt plan that actually shows the stormwater and sanitary debt for the 2012 and 14 cycles as GEO bonds that will be payable by the utilities. That affords us a lower interest rate, as well as eliminates the need for additional reserve funds and a lot of other covenants that come with revenue bonds. And so we're going to look at a better financing tool to get lower interest rates as well. But we'll have a full explanation of that before we issue the bonds.
And maybe you're going to explain this. Can you explain as far as the interest rates are concerned, can you explain what we're getting as far as the interest rates and whether this is a good time to borrow money?
That is an easy answer today because we are at historical lows on the interest rates. Historical as in like the last 40 years. We haven't seen this kind of low interest rate environment. So again, it's a year-by-year decision as far as how much should we use cash versus borrowing. But in low interest rate environments, you're always better off borrowing because the cost to do the project later will likely inflate to be a higher cost, even if you thought you might save on the interest rate later. So you're always better off in a low interest rate environment shifting more to the debt side, and then as interest rates go up, shift your projects back over to cash where you can. You still have to be able to pay for them, obviously.
Based upon the debt number that you had on your graph there, do we have the option of refinancing any of these with interest rates so low right now?
Well, the option is there, but the debt is not that old yet, and so we're not upon the call dates. When we do get to the call dates, which I think will start maybe 2014, there actually might be an opportunity to do a refunding. At that point, obviously, we'll do the analysis and potentially pull a trigger. And in all likelihood, unless interest rates go up quickly, there will be refunding opportunities. The last point on the stormwater, again, since we're doing well on time, the stormwater utility actually has a sunset date to it. And so there's some self-restrictions that the council had made years ago on not borrowing beyond that sunset date. And so we'll come back to you with a recommendation on what to do with that sunset date to get rid of that, essentially. Otherwise, we'll always be constrained on the debt side.
And what is the date, Scott?
Off the top of my head, I think it's like 2026 or 2024.
Okay.
And so obviously if we're going to want to issue 20-year debt, that would go beyond that date. And so we'll, again, need to come back to you to amend that as well. Again, city manager has mentioned you've got the CIP in front of you. There will be a couple more workshops in the budget season, if you will. If you've got questions, we can address those that way or through questions that are posed to the city manager's office. We can get those answers back to you as well. We're looking at February 6th, if that works for you. It is not a regular council meeting, but we want to get the sanitary discussion and the parking enterprise taken care of before we actually set a hearing for the budget date. So if February 6th morning at 7:30 would work for a workshop, we've also got a couple other finance discussions. We've got our CAFR, our annual audit. We've received that, so I'd like to have a very brief presentation on that, as well as parking and sanitary for February 6th, and then the regular council meeting on the 13th.
Let me just sort of add to that, if I could. The February 6th would be 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
You've got there's not a council meeting on that day, as Scott said, but it would give you time between now and then to go through the CIP document and develop any questions you have, or call and we can respond before that. But that would be a good opportunity on that date to come back and do the CIP document review, if you will, and then take up those issues that Scott mentioned with sanitary parking and the CAFR. So if that seems workable, Mayor and Council, we'll sort of plan on that.
Okay.
But if you want a different schedule, that's fine too. Just let us know.
Works for me.
Any other questions, thoughts? That gets us through the budget update.
Yes, sir.
Unless council has any other questions, should we open it up for public comment? Anybody in the public have any words of wisdom here? Thoughts? Seeing none, why don't we call this meeting adjourned?